The Candle of Vision by A.E. George William Russell, 1918. The Architecture of Dream. I have failed in my purpose if I have not made it clear that in the actual architecture of dream and vision there is mystery which is not explained by speaking or suppressed desire or sex or any those things which modern psychology surmise are realized in dream. A mood may attract its affinities, but it does not create what it attracts. And between anger and a definite vision of conflict, there is gulf as mysterious as there was between Aladdin's desire and the building of his marvelous palace. I desire a house, but desire does not build it. I design a house, but every line is drawn with full consciousness, and when I give the plan to a builder, every brick is placed with full consciousness by the mason. No coherent architecture in city or dream erased magically by some unreason which translates bodily desire into organic form. However, swift the succession may be, in that second of time between desire and its visionary embodiment or fulfillment, there must be space for intellectual labor, the construction of forms or the choice of forms and the endowing of them with motion. A second to my brain is to brief a fragment of time for more than sight, but I must believe that to a more intense consciousness, which is co-worker with mine, the second may suffice for glimpse into some pleroma of form for the selection of these and the unrolling of a vast pageantry. Something there is creator within me. Behind this swiftness, I falter a hopeless laggard, for it may be a traveler through the Ardennes and back again, with the merchandise of its travel before my pulse is beaten twice. As an artist who has labored, required a conscious artist to arrange them, a magician to endow them with life, and that the process intellectual, that is, it is conscious on some plane of being, though that self which sits in this gate of the body does not know what powers of dignitaries meet in the inner place chamber of the soul. When we have dreams of flying and see all things from an angle of vision of which we never could have experience in waking, we know that to speak of the moving picture of dream as memories or unconscious recombinations of things seen with waking is to speak without subtle or intellectual comprehension. I criticize the figures I see in dreams or vision exactly as I would the figure in painting. Even if I see a figure in dream I have seen when waking, if the figure acts in manner different from its action when seen with the physical eye, if it now walking when it then sat or looking down where before I looked up, and if this motion in dream appear authentic so that face and form have the proper light and shade and the anatomies are undistorted, that dream change in the figure of memory is itself a most perplexing thing. We must suppose that memory is as fixed in its way as a sun picture is fixed, or as the attitude of a statue is fixed. If it fades, it should be by loss of precision and not into other equally precise but different forms and gestures. Now we could not, without cracks or distortion of anatomies or complete remodeling, change the pose of a status, even if it was modeled in some easily malleable substance, and the plastic change from stillness to motion in a figure which we presume to be a memory is wonderful when we think of it. Wonderful as if the little tangra in clay upon my shelf should change from its cast solidity and wake up and down before me. For myself, I think man is a protein being within whose unity there is diversity. And there are creatures in the soul which can inform the image of our memory or the eternal memory, and speak through them to us in dreams, so that we hear their voices, and it is with us in our minute microcosmos fashion, even as it was said of the universe that it is soliloquy of deity, wherein Ein Sof talks to Ein Sof. We can make such general speculation about all pictures moving before the inner eye, and it is always worthwhile investigating the anatomy of vision and to be intent on what appears to us, for if we have intentness, we have memory. A mental picture which at first had yielded nothing to us may be followed by other which indicate a relation to the earliest in the series, so that they seem like pages read at different times from the same book. When I was young, I hunted the mountains much, finding in the high air vision became richer and more luminous. I have there watched for hours shining landscape and figures in endless procession, trying to discover in these some significance other than mere beauty. Once on the hillside, I seemed to slip from today into some remote yesterday of earth. There was the same valley below me, but now it was deepening into evening, and the skies were twirling up to one blue heaven to another. There was a battle in the valley, and men wheeled darkly higher, and see, eyes, higher and tighter. I remembered one warrior about whom the battle was thickest, for a silver star flickered above his helmet through the dusk. But this I soon forgot, for I was impelled to look upward, and there above me was a airship glittering with light. It halted above the valley while a man, grey beard, very majestic, his robes all starred and jeweled, bent over and looked down upon the battle. The pause was but for an instant, and then the light flashed more brilliantly. Some luminous mist was just jutted upon the air from many tubes below the boat, and it sheered and passed beyond the mountains, and it was followed by another and yet others, all glittering with light, and they climbed the air over the hill and were soon lost amid the other lights of heaven. I must be a quarter of a century ago since I saw this vision, which I remember clearly because I painted this ship, and it must, I think, be about 5 or 6 years after that a second vision in the same series startled me. I was again on the high place, and this time the apparition in the mystical air was so close that if I could have stretched out, a young man was steering the boat, his black hair blown back from his brows, this face pale and resolute, his head bent, his eyes intent on his wheel, and beside him sat a woman, a rose-colored soul sparkled with golden threads drawn over her head. Around her shoulders, across her bosom and folded arms, her face was proud as a queen, and I long remember that face for its pride, stillness, and beauty. I thought at the moment it was some image in the eternal memory of civilization more remote than Atlantis, and I cried out in my heart in a passion of regret for remorse. Romance passed away from the world, not knowing that the world's great age was again returning, and that soon we were to swim once more beneath the epic skies. After that, at different times and places, I saw other such aerial wonders, and this I noted that all such visions had character in keeping with each other, that they were never mixed up with modernity, that they had the peculiarities by which we recognize civilization as distinct from each other, Chinese from Greek or Egyptian from Hindu. They were the stuff out of which romance is made, and if I had been a storyteller like our great Standish or Grady, I might have made without questioning a wonder tale of the air legendary of tourists for tourists. But I have always had much of the philosophic as the artistic interest in what people call imagination, and I have thought that many artists and poets gave to art or romance what would have had an equal, if not a greater interest as psychology. I began to ask myself where in the sweet times or in what calm of space these ships were launched. What it ages ago in some actual workshop in an extinct civilization, and were these but images in the eternal memory, or were they launched by my own spirit from some magical eraser of being, and if so, what intent, or were they images or things yet to be in the world? Begotten in the eternal mind, where past, present, and future coexist, and from which they stay into the imagination of scientist, engineer, or poet to be out realized in discovery, mechanism, or song. I found it impossible to decide. Sometimes I even speculate on a world interpreting ours where another sun is glowing and other stars are shining over other woods, mountain, rivers, and another race of being. And I knew not why it should not be so. We are forced into such speculation when we become certain that no power in us of which we are conscious is concerned in the creation of such visionary forms. If these ships were launched so marvelously upon the visionary air by some transcendent artisan of the spirit, they must have been built for some purpose, and for what? I was not an engineer intent on aerial flight, but this is, I think, notable that at the moment of vision, I seemed to myself to understand the mass mechanism of these airships, and I felt if I could have stepped out of this century into that visionary baroque, I could have taken the wheel and steered it confidently on to its destiny. I knew that the closing of a tube at one side of the bow would force the ship to steer in that direction. Because of the force jetted from the parallel tube on the other side, no longer balanced by an equal emission of power, operated to bring about the change. There is an interest in speculating about this impression of knowledge, for it might indicate some complexity of the subconscious mind with the vision which startled the eye. That knowledge may have been proud on the one while seeing was granted to the other. If the vision was imagination, that is, if the airship was launched from my own spirit, I must have been in council with the architect, perhaps in deep sleep. If I supposed it was imagination, I am justified in trying by every means to reach with full consciousness to the eraser where such wonders are wrought. I cannot be counted to accept it as imagination and not try to meet the architect As for this vision of airships and for many other, I have been unable to place them even speculatively in any world or any century, and it must be so with the imagination of many other people. But I think that when we begin speculation about these things, it is the beginning of our awakening from the dream of life. I have suggested that images of things to be may come into our sphere out of a being where time does not exist. I have had myself so definite proof as yet that any vision I saw was prophetic and only one which suggested itself as such to me, and this was so remarkable that I put it on record. Because if it was prophetic, its significance may become apparent later on. I was meditating about 21 years ago in a little room, and my meditation was suddenly broken by a series of pictures which flashed before me with the swiftness of moving picture in a theater. They had no relation I could discover to the subject of my meditation and were interpolated into it then, perhaps because in a tense state of consciousness when the brain becomes luminous, it is easier to bring to consciousness what has to be brought. I was at the time much more interested in the politics of eternity than in the politics of my own country, and would not have missed an hour of my passionate meditation on the spirit to have witnessed the most dramatic spectacle in any of our national movement. In this meditation, I was brought to a wooded valley beyond which was a mountain, and between heaven and the earth over the valley was a vast figure aureoled with light, and it descended from that cycle of light and assumed human shape and stood before me and looked at me. The face of this figure was broad and noble in type, beardless and dark haired. It was in its breast akin to the face of the young Napoleon, and I would refer both a common archetype. This being looked at me and vanished and was instantly replaced by another vision. And this second vision was of a woman with a blue cloak around her shoulders who came into a room and lifted a young child upon her lap. And from all island rays of light converged on that child. Then this disappeared and was on the instant followed by another picture in the series. And there I was brought from Ireland to look on the coronation coronation throne at Westminster, and there sat on it a figure of empire which grew weary and let all the scepter from its fingers, and itself then dropped and fell and disappeared from the famous seat. And after that, in swift succession, came another scene, and gigantic figure, wild and distraught, beating a drum, stalked up and down, and wherever its feet fell, there were sparks and the swirling of flame and black smoke upward as from burning cities. It was like the red swineherd of legend, which beat men into an insane frenzy. And when the distraught figure vanished, I saw the whole of Ireland lit up from mountain to sea, spreading its rays to the heavens, and as in the vision which bridged the series saw and told to Patrick. All I could make of that sequence was that some child of destiny around whom the future of Ireland was to pivot was born then or to be born, and that it was to be an avatar was symbolized by the descent of the first figure from the sky, and that before that high destiny was to be accomplished, the power of empire was to be weakened, and there was to be one more tragic episode in Irish history. Whether this is truth or fantasy, time alone can tell. No drums that have since beaten in this land seem to me to be mad enough to be foretold of in that wild drumming. What can I say of such a vision but that it impressed me to forgetfulness of analysis for what it says was more important than any philosophy of its manner. I have tried to reason over it with myself as I would with a sequence of another character to deduce from a sequence better than could be done from a single vision valid reasons for believing that there must be conscious intellect somewhere beyond the sequence, but I cannot reason over it. I only know that I look everywhere in the face of use, in the aspect of every new notability, hoping before I die to recognize the broad browed avatar of my vision.